good morning, good afternoon, and whatever, depending on which part of the world you are here. We are here as part of the second UN World Summit on Social Development, which is a conference that is at the moment going on in Doha, Qatar, starting on the 4th November and goes on till the 6th. And my name is Sharad Davala, and I'm going to be the moderator of this session, this event. And I'm a sociologist and currently the chair of Basic Income Earth Network. Um, and here we have three panelists, and I will introduce the three panelists uh, eventually. But before that, basically, this whole idea of basic income, it stands on five pillars. It is universal, it is unconditional, it's cash only, it's periodic, and it's individual. And in this particular context of this World's Summit on Social Development, we share as a team here and as BN and as partners of this event, we share the political declaration's conviction on the interconnectedness of social development and social justice for the achievement and maintenance of international peace and security, which is what this event, which is part of this larger summit, is going to focus on. And we believe that basic income could be a powerful instrument for social justice and for it provides economic and basic material security. Let me introduce our panelists here. Um, the first is Olivia D. Schutter, professor. He's the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. And he's a professor of law at University of Louvain in Belgium and at the Sciences Po in France. He's also a member of the Global Law School faculty at New York University. He's a member of the Council of Europe's European Committee of Social Rights, and he's also the co-chair of IPES Food. Professor Schutter, his office has consistently referred to basic income in his office's reports as a powerful instrument for eradication of poverty. Our second panelist, Diana Bashur. Diana is completing her PhD at the University of Vienna, focusing on basic income as a complementary development and peace building instrument. She has worked for the French Development Agency and the United Nations in New York, in Vienna, and in Damascus. She's also the UN liaison for the Basic Income Earth Network. She's on the executive committee of Basic Income Earth Network. Our next panelist, Professor Guy Standing. He's a professor of development studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, co-founder of Basic Income Earth Network. He has written numerous books on precariat, basic income, and the commons. He has also led many teams implementing basic income pilots in different parts of the world, including I had the privilege of working with Professor Standing in India, the Indian pilot. And then we have our final panelist, Mr. Raja Khalidi. He's a development economist who has widely researched, published, and lectured on Palestinian economic conditions in Lebanon, in the Arab region, in Israel, and in the occupied territories. He was senior economist until 2013 with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, which is UNCTAD, as we know, in Geneva. And between 2019 and 25, he served as the Director General of the Palestinian Economic Policy Research Institute, MAS, the premier Palestinian economic think tank. So without taking much of your time, I hand it over to Diana to first screen and share the video. Unfortunately, we don't have Professor Schuster with us, but he has sent a video which we are going to watch now.
Good morning. Let me first of all thank the Basic Income Earth Network for proposing that we discuss basic income schemes as a tool for social justice in the context of this World Summit for Social Development. Traditionally, the fight against poverty was conceived of as a three-step sequence. We first grow the economy, we then tax households and corporations, and finally, we redistribute the wealth that is created by financing public services and social protection in a way that targets the individuals in need. And that approach to combating poverty, which is the most classic, relies on the idea that economic growth will be infinite and that the resources we can spend on the fight against poverty are scarce, and so we should target carefully on those who are most in need. And I believe that unconditional or universal basic income schemes force us to reimagine the fight against poverty and to broaden the toolbox at our disposal to combat poverty effectively. Of course, there are different versions of what basic income schemes can mean, and the circumstances that each country faces are different from country to country. Nevertheless, I think we can say that basic income proposals have three important virtues that, in my work as Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, I have tried to put forward. Firstly, basic income schemes are a means to avoid the under inclusion or the exclusion resulting from the introduction of conditionalities in social protection schemes or resulting from excessive targeting. In fact, when social protection is deliberately focused exclusively on the needs of people in poverty who need most to be supported, there is a big risk that this will result in stigmatization, in institutional maltreatment, as described thus by ATD Fourth World as one of the hidden dimensions of poverty, but also that this will result in high rates of non-take-up of benefits in the area of social protection, as I tried to show in a report I presented in 2022. In fact, people may fail to claim certain social benefits because of a fear of being monitored, because they will be controlled through the use of algorithms is as a result of claiming certain benefits, because they may fear they will not be able to comply with certain conditionalities imposed on them, or because they simply cannot overcome all the bureaucratic hurdles imposed on them for having access to certain forms of support. They are not able to collect all the documentation required for them to be considered to be deserving of support. And in that sense, basic income schemes, unconditional in spirit, are a way to avoid these obstacles that people encounter in their access to social protection. They're a way to destigmatize social protection, and they're a way to make social protection more popular across society, and perhaps in a way that may be seen as paradoxical, better financed because it will benefit everyone universally within society. Everyone will be willing to contribute, as illustrated, for example, in the area of healthcare or education that are universally provided and that everyone therefore feels a duty to contribute to. So that is a first benefit of basic income schemes. The second benefit, perhaps paradoxically, is that universal or unconditional basic income schemes are a means to encourage active inclusion by encouraging people to take up employment. Now, this is, of course, paradoxical. It goes against the widespread prejudice that social protection should not be too generous and should encourage people to seek work, and that if we are too generous with social protection, we will encourage laziness and dependency. Yet we know from a large number of country level examples and experiments with universal basic income schemes that people want, in fact, to contribute to society. They want to be useful citizens. They want to acquire skills and social status by taking up employment. But unconditional basic income schemes encourage them to take up work because they will be able to invest in the acquisition of skills, in the acquisition of training, allowing them to be productive and employable on the labor market, and because UBI allows them to choose work that is suitable to their needs and aspirations instead of being forced to accept work that is far from home, that is dangerous or precarious, in other terms, that does not correspond to the notion of decent work. So UBI, contrary to a widespread prejudice, is actually a tool that can stimulate access to employment and allow people to have access to decent jobs. The third benefit of unconditional basic income schemes is that they may be seen as a means to reduce the stress, the pressure to constantly improve productivity because of a fear of falling behind. In fact, I presented to the General Assembly a report on what I called the burnout economy, in which I showed that the rise of inequalities over the past 40 years in major economies has caused people to develop a particular form of anxiety of falling behind, an anxiety of losing social status. And this kind of pressure, this kind of stress, may lead people into clinical forms of depression or anxiety, causing burnout. And this is what we studied also with Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson, that did so much to show the benefits of societies investing more in reducing inequalities of wealth and income. And so UBI can relieve this pressure. UBI can reassure individuals that they will not fall into extreme poverty. They can relieve this social anxiety of falling behind in comparison to others, and thus create more social cohesion, and this with huge benefits to mental health across society. Now, of course, when I make these proposals on unconditional basic income in UN circles, I meet with the classic objection that it is too costly for societies to afford. The question of financing UBI schemes is regularly raised. However, I would like to highlight that social protection, including UBI, is not just a cost that will increase public deficits and grow the public debt. It is an investment. Indeed, it has important multiplier effects on the local economy. It stimulates demand, allowing to overcome business cycles and to avoid economic downturns from turning into full-blown recessions. It builds resilience of the economy against shocks, both at household level and at community level. And it encourages parents to invest in the education of their children. It allows them to provide better health and better nutrition to children, building the human capital that will ensure that in the future we grow as prosperous societies. So for all these reasons, I would like to again thank the Basic Income Earth Network for their initiative. I'd like to thank all the organizations partnering with them to send these important messages to the World Summit for Social Development. Thank you.
That was a very lucid exposition of the idea of universal basic income, that it is uh, counterintuitive to what the known knowns, and he has really explained it so well, uh, giving the background of the burnout economy, and also me coming from the pilots. I have led at least two pilots in India, and I think all that Professor is uh, prescribing or even stipulating this idea. I think some of these, we have plenty of evidence now to show each and every point that Professor Schuster has mentioned. That actually now brings us to Diana Bashur, who will now make her presentation. Diana.
Basic income, and in what ways is it different from the more traditional cash transfer programs we know in development work? So, basic income is distributed to everyone in a community. It is universal. It's given to the person, so every man and woman receives it. It is unconditional, so there are no behavioral expectations in return for receiving a basic income. This also means that it cannot be withdrawn. Beneficiaries can expect it on a regular basis, and it comes in a cash form. So these are the key difference with cash transfer programs, which, as the first speaker mentioned, are often targeted, can be conditional, distributed to the household, not to the person, and are not necessarily regular. Um, Traditional cash transfers have shown a lot of efficiencies and inefficiencies, and sort of these key differences, the key attributes of basic income are what drives its transformative effect, which I'd like to speak to briefly. Um, I'll go over the key evidence from pilots in India, Namibia, Bangladesh, and Brazil, um, and speak to in what ways this basic income, unconditional and universal cash, has been transformative. And this is essentially based on how individuals choose to spend this basic income, which they are free to do as they see fit. So consistently across contexts, beneficiaries spend their basic income on food, on improving their shelter, thereby becoming healthier, and then they also invest in their children's education. Once they realize that they can meet these basic needs over time, beneficiaries then buy income generating assets. They purchase cattle, they purchase sewing machines, they purchase fridges to engage in productive activities. So as a result, in the Namibia pilot, for instance, self-employment increased by 300%, crime decreased by 42%, and animal poaching basically disappeared throughout the pilot. We've also seen how this impact was particularly transformative for women and girls. For many of the women participants in the pilots, this was their first encounter with unconditional cash that they were free to spend as they saw fit. So in the India pilot, for instance, there were more women entrepreneurs than men, and girls' nutrition improved more than that of boys. Um, as a fourth transformative impact, as everyone in this community was receiving this basic income as it's universally distributed, when everyone knows that their neighbor is receiving this cash grant, a process of common decision making started where people came together and start to think of how they could, for instance, pool their modest basic income into small projects that would benefit the entire community. So they paved the road of the village, for instance. Another month they paid for the surgery of a child whose parents couldn't afford it. So in this sense, basic income generated more trust among people. They started cooperating, showing solidarity to one another, and improving social cohesion. So we have here a tool that can not only alleviate poverty without stigmatization, it can help people regain their livelihoods and thereby also increase social cohesion. And in this sense, the basic income can help us bridge the humanitarian development peace nexus, which is a large initiative by UN entities and civil society organizations that is promoted system-wide. So, what is it about basic income that is behind this transformative impact? I think firstly, it's a message of trust to the individual. When you give them an unconditional basic income, you're basically telling them I trust you to spend this cash on the priority you have and you set for yourself, and that a priority for you to meet your basic needs in dignity. And so when people are able to do so over time, as the basic income is regular, it expands people's horizons It expands people's perspective about themselves and about what is possible. And so this has shown to be truly empowering in the pilots across the world. The last point on this transformative impact is that basic income essentially is a cash injection into the entire community. It creates an increase in local demands for goods and services and thereby boosts productive activity, thereby sort of jumpstarting the local economy and creating decent jobs. So where does basic income stand within international organizations? It is on the radar of many of the UN and other international organizations. I'll list here a few we've been involved with. Um, I worked with UNIDO, the UN Industrial Development Organization, for a design of a pilot in northern Iraq. The World Bank has had several publications. They also launched a basic income project in Sudan, which had to halt for political reasons. At the Basic Income Earth Networks Congress of 2021, we had a panel where the World Bank, IMF, UNDP, UNIDO, ILO, and a few other organizations of the UN spoke in favor of this instrument and how it relates to their mandate. UNDP commissioned a pilot proposal for Nepal in 2023. My colleagues Sarah and Guy worked on this pilot design. Most recently, the Secretary General's new agenda for peace includes basic income as an innovative instrument for conflict prevention. Earlier this year at the Seville Conference for Financing for Development, there was a basic income hosted side event, as well as this current event we're hosting online. And tomorrow there is also another in-person side event at the World Social Summit for Development hosted by UNIDO. If anyone is there, please do join us. So this to say that there's growing interests across UN entities and the international organization, but the exploration remains piecemeal. So what are the particular advantages for the UN from basic income? Essentially, it is an instrument with high efficiency, as was mentioned by the special rapporteur. We've seen multiplier effect of up to 2.6 times and important feedback effects where the basic income renders investments in basic services more effective. And so when we're at a time of effort consolidation across the UN system, we can consider, for instance, coalescing the wide spectrum of cash transfers into one simple tool that meets the basic income criteria. And so also to say that the basic income is in line with major UN policy paradigms and landmark initiatives. I'll list a few here, which we can sort of refer to in our advocacy work. Leave No One Behind, Our Common Agenda, the New Agenda for Peace, are some of the initiatives where basic income's principles are really essentially reflected in what these paradigms call for. So moving forward, I'd suggest we rethink cash for development. We can't trust the vulnerable with unconditional cash. Vulnerable individuals, poor communities are responsible in the way they spend their cash. They know what their priorities are, and no one else, I think, is in a position to determine what these priorities are to be. We need to also slowly move to a universal approach over a targeting approach, which has shown its inefficiencies. We also need to consider cash more systematically for socioeconomic development and not only for humanitarian aid. And so I'd invite us to consider this innovative tool at a critical time for the UN. We can rely on strong global evidence of basic income. It has these pilots and experiments have legitimized this policy across the world. And so I'd invite anyone, entities, UN and civil society organizations working on development to more systematically consider the advantages of basic income for their mandates. We have basic income experts reachable through the Basic Income Earth Network, and we're spread across a global network with local expertise. So thank you very much. I'll hand over back to Sarat.
Thank you, Diana. I think Diana has been really doing pioneering work in this field of peace building and reconstruction in different parts of the world. And I think that has actually made BN actually take serious engagement with the UN process. Um, and then today, the other two panelists also have made enormous amount of efforts to conceptualize the idea of UBI in the context of conflict. Guy has been writing, and Guy and Raja together have also uh, really worked on the question of Palestine, which is what we turn to now. I would just add that in addition to the special situations of conflict zones, I think globally, what we are seeing is a kind of growing income insecurity. Every country I travel, I think that is the kind of mm, pandemic that we are noticing today. I think that is the reason why I think it's important that UN agencies particularly take more interest into this idea. That brings us to the next topic, emergency basic income for Palestine. I will invite Professor Guy Standing to make his presentation.
Okay. What I would like to talk about is the idea of a basic income in the context of emergencies. But I want to begin by reminding us all that the fundamental justification for moving towards having a basic income as an economic right of every usual legal resident of a country is based on an ethical rationale. It's a matter of common justice. A number of religious leaders, including the Pope, have come round to realizing that a basic income is a matter of sharing our inherited public wealth. If we allow private inheritance of private wealth, then we should be thinking of public inheritance of public wealth. And at the moment, we don't respect that principle. So it's a matter of common justice, it's a matter of ecological justice, and justice in general. It's also a matter of freedom. It enhances individual freedom, it enhances community freedom, and it enhances liberal freedom, the freedom to be moral. It's very important, that principle. And the third is that it is a matter of giving people basic security. Security is an economic need. It's a public good because if all of us have security, we all benefit and society benefits. So I think the ethical principles are fundamental. But in addition, I think that we are living in a time of chronic uncertainty in which the adage of Beveridge comes to mind. After the conflict of the Second World War, he made a famous remark saying, "It is a time for revolutions, not for patching." He was not a revolutionary, but he believed that we had to have a fundamental reset of social protection and providing people with rights in the post-war era. We have the same now, but a fundamentally different situation in which the whole world is faced by chronic uncertainty. I'm an economist, and for an economist, uncertainty is different from contingency risks. It comes from unknown unknowns. We don't know when people are going to be hit, who's going to be hit, or how hard we're going to be hit. And we don't know if we're going to have resilience to recover. Just reflect for a moment of the terrifying disaster that's hit Jamaica and Cuba and Haiti through the storm Melissa. It's fundamentally hitting people, and it's the same in many other natural disasters or post-conflict situations. And also, I remind us all, we are at a period in our collective history where it's also a political imperative to promise people basic security. Insecure people make bad citizens. they tend to listen to neo-fascist populists promising to bring back yesterday. It is a social vaccine that we should see a basic income as being. I want to add some additional comments that relate in particular to responding to natural disasters or post-conflict situations in general. We argue from a basic income point of view that it should be seen as part of a package of reforms, a transformational package in which other policies have to be integrated with a basic income. A basic income by itself is not a panacea. It's not a panacea. But if you have a basic income linked with a strategy to recover the economy, recover the society, then you can list a number of virtues that come with it. First of all, I think we must emphasize that in the context that we're talking about, it's vital to have a universalistic approach. You cannot sensibly identify who is above or below some poverty line in the context of a natural disaster or post-conflict. It's ridiculous to even imagine you can do so. It would be extremely costly, and it would also result in what Olivia mentioned, high exclusion errors. We know that from countless research over the last 100 years. And anybody who pretends that you could target and identify through targeting and means testing and so on is just flying against all the conceivable evidence. But we also found that if you have a targeting scheme, there are also high inclusion errors. Paradoxically, some of the people who benefit from a targeting are those who can play the system and manage to get benefits without actually meeting the criteria. It's also important to emphasize, which both Diana and Olivia have mentioned, but I want to emphasize it so fundamentally importantly, which is that an individual scheme paid to each individual adult, man, woman, equally, empowers women. Schemes that just give to the household entrench male patriarchal relationships. We have found that if you give to the man and the woman equally individually, you increase the empowerment of women. But that makes it also important to emphasize that giving only to women tends to create sexual problems, gender problems, whatever you want to call them, but inter-family tensions. It's essential to regard giving each individual the economic right as an individual. And the final point I want to emphasize, which is that poverty traps exist in every single country. If you only give to people who are identified as poor, then someone who tries not to be poor in that system loses the benefits, and therefore there is a disincentive for them to try and an incentive for them to enter the black economy illegally or whatever. So fundamentally, I think the universalistic principle is something that is very important. Another point, if you're dealing with emergencies, is that it reduces the probability of petty corruption. Schemes like that have been done in Afghanistan, which hand out to particular groups to choose how to deal with aid, invite corruption at all possible levels. If you have a transparent, simple scheme of giving people a basic income through a card system, a digital technology, which is fundamentally easy these days, it is transparent. Everybody knows who should be getting what, and it encourages a sense of social solidarity. I think that is crucial. Among the findings that we've found in our pilots in Africa, in India, and we've found it even in Wales recently, and in Finland, and in Marica in Brazil, is it increases a sense of social solidarity. and induces what I call network effects. One of the points that we found in Madhya Pradesh was that once everybody was receiving their basic income, there was a collective action development, formation of committees, formation of schemes to improve sanitation in local communities, and schemes to improve moral suasion on families to send their children to school, and all of which came from within the community, whose sense of solidarity was improved. Another feeling that we've found, another finding, which has been found from dozens and dozens of pilots and experiments across the world, is among the first things that people do when they start receiving their basic income is to start paying down their debts. Now, we live at a time when the whole world is experiencing unprecedentedly high levels of household debt, personal debt, corporate debt, public debt. Debt is a phenomenon that causes multiple forms of insecurity and stress and trauma. The fact that a basic income starts to lead to the pay down of debt leads to people feeling having a greater sense of personal control over their lives. And that surely is a fundamental objective of any welfare policy. Now, the important thing I wanted to end with is that a basic income not only has the multiplier effects, which Diana has mentioned, which we have found in our pilots. In other words, for every dollar or every cent that is spent leads to an increase in spending and income well above the cost of that basic income. You also had feedback effects that lead to improvement in health, which leads to less demand on public health services, which leads to savings, leads to improved efficiency, and the reduction in morbidity leads to improvements in productivity, which has a feedback effect in itself in family formation and public health. This sense of feedback and network effects means that the net cost of any scheme is substantially less than the gross costs. People who do a back of the envelope calculation and say a basic income would cost X million or X billion ignore the feedback effects. A basic income properly designed and properly integrated in other policies can pay for itself and more so. We've shown this in various books and reports and publications, and I want to emphasize that because that is often the most telling objection by people who should be humble enough to admit they don't know a lot about basic income when they sound off having opinions. Those of us who've been spending many, many years in doing the research and doing the analysis sometimes have to face a lot of prejudice. And the prejudice of reducing work is probably the biggest of all. And I emphasize most of all that it improves the quality and amount of work. A basic income treats all forms of work, including care work, the work that women do, as equal and as durable and desirable in themselves. And basically, a basic income enhances the capacity to do forms of work that people want to do. And that, I think, is a fundamental answer to those who make the standard objections about reducing labor supply and being unaffordable. It's affordable, it's dignifying, and it's an essential policy for all forms of emergency and as a developmental tool. So I just hope that the UN as a body will develop toolkits and will move forward to making this an integral part of development policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy. Yeah, really, I'm glad you made that excellent distinction between contingency versus the chronic insecurity that we face in the world today. And I really like your coinage of calling it a social vaccine. I think it really brings in a lot of, it resonates with what we see in the pilots and what we see in reality. And I would now invite Mr. Raja Hamidi to speak from really I think the war zone that you're in the midst of fire, Raja.
I'm an economist too, but basic income is a concept which I was generally familiar with until 18 months ago, early on in the war, when we realized that what was going on, and that was an early stage in Gaza and had started in the West Bank, was going to be transformational. And hence the idea to discuss the idea to study this proposal for a basic income, emergency basic income in Gaza, and with a pilot suggested in the West Bank, according to the best practices, etc. That's the way Guy and we worked it out. However, since then, the scale of devastation is totally, beyond comprehension. People haven't actually gone into count, so all of the estimates we're hearing about billions of dollars and numbers of housing units are image satellite based sourced. So anyhow, my point is that the scale of devastation is yet to be really assessed. We know that the human devastation is way above the 70,000 that have been actually found, and we know there have been expert studies about projections that this is actually, that 70,000 is actually going to be 120, 130,000 war casualties, fatalities, the maimed, the orphaned, etc. Space as well, of course, has been obliterated. Public space, private space. So, you have, as economists, we spent the first half of the year really learning what this genocide meant in terms of the economy and society, and hence the terms that we've now integrated into our understanding of domicide, of spatiocide, scholasticide. There are no educational institutions of any sort. There are no health institutions of any sort, knowledge institutions, cultural heritage. So anyhow, so we've learned without really having numbers, because rates of unemployment and rates of poverty and rates of this and that and access to services just don't mean anything anymore. So the scale of the disaster is considerable, no doubt about it. And it hasn't finished, of course, and as now we're learning as well, genocide is a process. It's not an event, it's a process. And it has high points and low points. So we're perhaps coming down from the high point of the last 2 years, but that doesn't mean it's over. So with that in mind, updating our initial idea that the only sensible solution in the Gaza situation was a basic income, or emergency EBI, we call it. So, I believe first that the case for basic income in Palestine has never been stronger, could not be stronger. There's this tabula rasa. We're all equal in Gaza. There is no extreme poverty and less extreme. There's no real employment and not unemployment. There is no female participation in the labor force, or non everybody. So everything is totally, the deck has been thrown in the air, and the cards have yet to fall on the ground. Now, in if UBI, as Guy said, is a right, which I think, for moral and developmental even purposes, it is, then, for sure, UBI in Gaza is the very least of rights. After the right to live, to not be killed, then you have that right, which is to satisfy your basic needs. And all the other rights maybe or maybe don't come later. The other thing is that, if you look at the economics of it, as well, the macroeconomics of it. PA budget support. PA has absorbed probably 15, $20 billion over 20 years, 15 years of EU, etc., Arab and other budget support, basically to pay salaries, but not to cover its deficit so much as to ensure this pumping of liquid of demand demand into aggregate demand in the economy, and it worked. So it's kept the economy. That's why you had a Palestinian economy that continues to grow without developing. So, again, things like targeting that we heard about from the special rapporteur and Guy, inclusion, all of these issues which are technically extremely important when you're doing pilots and when you're doing a custom-made, strategically packaged, as Guy said, UBI program. These technical transparency, these are not an issue in the Gaza context. So again, there's reasons that I would say it's somehow the easiest possible circumstances to do a successful UBI are in Gaza, believe it or not. Now, there's a number I want to keep in the picture. I have another 5 minutes. $3.5 billion. Okay, remember the number. So what is that? Why do I focus on that number? There are at least 4 interesting meanings or current values, let's say, to that number. One is that was the Gaza GDP, more or less. It was the Gaza GDP prior to 2023, which, of course, we know had been reduced from 35 to 17% of the overall Palestinian GDP, but nevertheless, 3.5 billion. The 2025 consolidated humanitarian appeal of the agencies and everybody else for a range of humanitarian relief, basically keeping people alive needs, food assistance, of course, cash transfers, medical, etc., 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 was what? 3.5. So that's the cost to the humanitarian effort if nothing else happens. If there's no reconstruction, if there's no economy, and if just we need to keep people alive. $3.5 billion is what the PA today claims, well, not claims, rightly claims, legitimately claims, that Israel has withheld in clearance revenue in various schemes and for various illegal pretenses, and that is owed to the PA Treasury, which is, of course, as we all know, struggling to pay salaries and, might not be here in a couple of months. And the fourth interesting thing about the 3.5 is that when we sat down with Guy and we set up a way of calculating what would basic needs estimate be in Gaza, we looked at population, namely adult and non-adult. We looked at, I think, household consumption core expenditures. I think it was probably the rather than GDP per capita or anything like that. So, and then we came up with an average household size and so on and so forth. The point is, we came up with a formula whereby adults would get twice of a child's payment. So for an average family of 4 children and 2 adults, you have basically 4 full basic income allocations, for example. The point is that the very careful calculation at the time came up to what? 3.5 billion for Gaza. Now, I know the experts will say we need to do pilots and that's why we designed something, and it'd still be great. The West Bank, by the way, is not exempt from the need for UBI, but in a world, which is not optimal, and we know the politics and the money behind all of this, let's focus on Gaza is my idea. So now, basically, so I want to now, rather than keep talking about how great it is, let's see how it could work in Gaza. So the first thing is you would set up a EBI fund for 12 or let's say 6 months. So, 6 months is a good horizon for the recipient. It would be managed by a UN agency consortium, which I think the UN's in their terrible challenge of dealing with Israel and Gaza in the last 2 years, they're at the end of their tether. They have no new solution. So they might well be open to something new, and that would pool resources and that would probably cost a lot less to manage and to administer than it does now. So you have people like the UNDP, WFP, UNICEF, Save the Children, the NGOs, all of these guys. And they all have experience in cash. Most of them do cash. That's all they do. You know, a lot of them just do that. Some of them through vouchers, some of them through bank transfers, etc. So you have an amazing experience here in managing that sort of thing from internationals as well as local partners in terms of stores who, you know, vouchers and stores and all of that. So then you can link it, of course, to the private sector renewal because it would allow then people to obviously to go back to work, which is one of the points. People would go back to work, would have the motivation to go and the ability to go back to work, where even though they're not going to be paid much, the markets would start reforming, etc. You would also link it to a unified registry for all Ghazawis to register all their civil information, lost IDs, lost property records, whatever it is, lost members of the family, you know, who is giving you currently assistance? Are you on somebody's road? All of this sort of thing, unified, which would, in fact, by people, you know, it would bring people in to fill this to provide this information because they need to get, you know, become recognized human beings again, and societies need to reform and all of that, and you have. So this is another inducement. I mean, you link it to that, and you achieve that. You kill that bird, you know, as well with the same stone. It could be wholly managed by the Palestinian banking sector, and effectively, you would be imposing financial inclusion. So you now have a financial inclusion rate in Palestine probably less than Gaza at 50% or under 50%. This would allow the Palestinian Authority, which has major problems with cash and liquidity and the shekels, etc., it would allow it to have 30 billion of its GDP, 3.5, through the banking system and digital. So you would bring people in, you know, you would include, everybody will become included to get their monthly payment of whatever it might be. I would finally add, you know, so there's an incentive thing there. As for financing, you know, and we know that the issue of feasibility, there's going to be donor, an agency pullback because they're used to doing things the way they're doing things. There's going to be, of course, ideological pushback. There's going to be policymakers are not going to understand what this means. Even, I mean, in Palestine, what does it mean? You're giving people cash for not working? I mean, you know, that doesn't make sense to them. So there's a certain amount of awareness raising that would be required to push back against the conventional wisdom. I think that everybody is on the verge of, you know, saying, give us something that really will work here and that is commensurate with this sort of catastrophe. So finally, on the financing, on the 3.5, I would suggest, you know, for those of us who end up, or those out there who might be, you know, contemplating this pipe dream, I mean, one might say, it should be 50-50, PPP. Everybody loves PPPs, private public partnership. The private should be the Palestinian expatriates community. And I've done a calculation of Palestinians working in the Gulf, Palestinians in Europe, Palestinian working age, and came up with some numbers, which are basically, if you recall prior, well, you don't recall, 30 years ago, the PLO, through the Arab governments, used to wage what was called levy a liberation tax. Every Palestinian working in the Gulf states was paying a tax which was given by those countries to the PLO for many, many years until things broke down. So let's suggest a Gaza tax. It would also relieve the Gulf states, by the way, of this expectations that are there for them. But certainly, if the Palestinian expatriates throughout the world can raise 1.7 billion, which is what I suggest they could, 1.6, then the donors can put up the rest, and they don't have to spend it on their humanitarian appeal. You would then have you don't need maybe you won't need a humanitarian. So that's my case. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you, Raja. Thank you for that message of hope, and we are really grateful to you for sharing your the situation and also equally the solution pathway, and that's really a message of hope. By the way, your name, I believe you have told us that it in your language it is called hope. Thank you for that message, message of hope.
He hoped, yes.
Thank
By
you
the way,
so
I have
much.
to leave within 5 minutes in case there are any questions that maybe
Yeah, I think we will
specifically I
now
need to answer.
immediately move to Q&A, if you can stay for 10 minutes. The summit, I mean, let me just read this out of most important message here. This summit's political declaration calls for a 5-year follow-up process on Doha we, commitments. We cannot afford to continue the status quo. As mentioned in the political declaration, 1/3 of the world population remains food insecure. Yet incredible amounts of development aid continues to flow. At the same time, tax breaks abound to large multinational corporations. In response to this, we propose to consider basic income's efficiency for addressing the root causes of poverty, to make leaps towards the SDGs as mentioned by Diana. In line with the political declaration, basic income has powerful multiplier effects, which makes the particularly efficient tool. To do so, we invite UN entities, donors, and civil society organizations to more systematically consider basic income in their operations. We at the BN are available to help with 3 regional hubs in Asia, Africa, and Latin America with expertise in pilot design and implementation. Please reach out to us to discuss the applicability of this instrument in your respective contexts. Now, with that, let's move to the Q&A. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for this brilliant discussion. My name is Kristen. I'm a PhD student at the University of Bath. So my work has been on child protection and international organizations, and particularly I've worked in Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza. My question is really about more of like the political economy of the proposition. And so you did mention when you were describing this that Israel has already withheld, taxation from the PA for many years. And so I guess my question is more of like situating this proposal within the kind of, actually, and the political economy, the particular political economy of occupation and settler colonialism, which is very unique. It's not just about this is an emergency that kind of, it's not a natural disaster like Guy was describing as like Hurricane Melissa. How have you configured, mindful of the critiques of the ways in which the projects of governance by the PA have also, undermined, the Palestinian struggle against occupation and against settler colonialism. My question to you, Raja, is to what extent have you configured these factors in this proposal as well? Thank you.
I'll try and, I mean, briefly, there are 2 aspects of the political economy of Palestinian economic social policy. One is, of course, Israel and what Israel allows and doesn't allow. Now, obviously, this proposal is assuming a continued and upscaling of the international aid and access at borders. So it's assuming an Israel maybe which doesn't exist. Yes, you're right. There's something there. There's always going to be a problem there. Any proposal you put on the trade, if it's trucks of aid or if it's allowing the banks in Gaza to function, for example, which would require Israeli buy-in. So obviously, there's going to all of these things are ready to go the moment the political circumstances don't. And in the absence of political change, other probably less optimal, inferior piecemeal policies and programs and whatever are rolled out by the PA or by whoever. The other angle of what you're talking about is, if you wish, I mean, I guess is this you said undermines occupation, undermines the resistance against occupation or something like that, if that's what you're talking about. I mean, I don't think that if you look at what happened here in the West Bank, the West Bank is, yeah, it's ruled by a PA. Yeah, it has a liberal economy. Yeah, the policies of this government have been ineffective in many, many, many areas of this regime. But it still stands because it has, it performs a function. Whether or not we like that function, the function that it performs is keeping 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank more or less alive. Okay, better, we're at a much better level of subsistence, and these are important things. Now, I know as an economist, as a critic of neoliberal policies in Palestine, I'm aware of the way in these that it's more than just economic. It's about how they think. Like I said, cash for not working, it doesn't make sense. But anyhow, that is. So, I mean, we're in a moment where a lot of things are changing in Palestine. There's a lot of very careful but unmistakable popular, lack of acceptance, let's say, of government. And it's not necessarily Gen Z type thing, huh? Unfortunately, I'd like it to be, but it's about everybody. It's the elites, it's this private sector, it's the workers, it's the peasants, it's the whole lot of us. And it's because of democracy, it's because of economic, anyhow, and it's because the PA doesn't confront the occupation. But if it had confronted the occupation, I wouldn't be speaking to you today. Now, is that valuable or not? I don't know. My point is the political economy. Of course, it's always there, but and there is no economic policy in Palestine. It's not political economy. That's I know that, that, but maybe policymakers don't realize that and pretend that there are technical solutions. No, there are technical, blueprints and plans that we need to move, and the UBI one is one, and the PA has just put out a full reconstruction plan. That's another. So I mean, let 1,000 plans, but let's push so that the material circumstances change vis-a-vis Israel, and I think that's where we can't do anything about it. We can't really force change in Israel, but that has to come. It must come, and that's my final message. And if it doesn't come, then we're going to remain in this colonial dependent relation, and Israel, will keep the impunity that unfortunately it continues to enjoy in the international arena.
Thank you, Raja. Anybody has questions now?
Thank you so much for this wonderful event. I've really learned a lot, and thank you for Raja, who's already left, and for Dina for her presentation. I have a simple question, which is actually in regards, how do you define the basic income in the context of whether it's occupation or colonial settlerism? Is it unconditional cash transfers or cash transfers for everyone, or how is it defined? Thank you.
Guy, would you like to take this?
Yeah. What we mean by a basic income is that if everybody, every man and every woman individually, would receive a modest amount each month, paid in cash or the equivalent in cash. These days it would be digitalized. It would be unconditional in behavioral terms and unconditional in terms of contributions. And it would be very much individual and non-withdrawable. In other words, it's an economic right. The level of the basic income would be a matter of political and economic judgment. My own preference is that it would start at a modest level, which would be below what we would regard as subsistence. In Madhya Pradesh, we provided a basic income that was about 40% of what was then a good subsistence. You will find that even at that low level, it has a series of positive effects on health, on schooling, on nutrition, on sanitation, and social solidarity. And it reduces trauma, it reduces stress. So I think the level is something that we would regard as what you can afford to start with, and it might start at a very low level and you hope to raise it as the funding develops. And I think that the schemes that have been tested all around the world have shown that even at a low level, it has the positive effects that we're thinking about.
Thank you. Thank you, Guy. I completely agree with Guy on this, that even if you start at a modest level, I think the dynamics of the political economy take over, and over a period of time, you reach a kind of a equilibrium. We have seen this in similar policies. We have Annie Miller in that. Thank you, Annie. Annie is one of the co-founders of BN itself. Thank you for coming, Annie, from Scotland.
Good to be here, Sarah. I've
Thank you.
been following it closely and thoroughly enjoying it. Well done, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie.
Yeah, my name is Imtiaz Rasool, and I'm the secretary for Bangladesh Basic Income Network. So I just wanted to compliment, and we want to learn more, and if we can, we want to learn more, and if we can do more. So it was more than compliment.
Thank you.
No questions. Thank you so much.
Imtiaz, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Anyone else have any questions? Guy, Yeah.
I would like to conclude my own contribution to this by saying that a basic income has been shown to increase feelings of empathy. And empathy is in short supply at the moment. The American far right are having a war on empathy in Elon Musk's terms. Empathy means feeling respect for others. I may not agree with the others, but I believe that they should have the equal right to me to survive and have subsistence. Empathy is what defines human civilization. And our experiments and other evidence shows that people who have basic security develop and continue to have feelings of empathy. And at this time of political crisis, where we have autocratic regimes growing everywhere, empathy and policies to improve empathy are fundamentally important. And I think that we should emphasize that in all our work.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you.
Seems that David is raising his hand. Sorry.
Yeah.
David?
David,
Dave.
I'm sitting in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in the freezing cold weather,
Go ahead, David.
and I've been involved in the food bank world in Canada, and was one of the builders of it in the early times. And we thought it would be very, very, very quick because we're a rich country, and it's not that. It's the echo I'm hearing here is very much what we deal with in Canada in the bottom end of our society and Indigenous peoples and etc. It's delightful to hear this. I've found more commentary, language that I can use, that I'd like to be able to come back to 2 or 3 of you and ask, not from here. I was really delighted that there's a feeling that there's a way out of this. It's really fun to hear this, that it's not just one group, one people, one stuff. So thank you for the opportunity to be. And if you ever need to be, we have good cold food in Winnipeg.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Manitoba reminds us of such wonderful work that has happened there, the experiment. And we also have Sheila here. Sheila, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Sheila from Canada. Yeah, Diana. Yes, Diana.
One quick point. We've been working and trying to engage with the UN for several years now. And as part of this World Social Summit on Social Development organized by the UN in Doha, we've been invited to UNIDO's side event tomorrow. So UNIDO is the UN Industrial Development Organization, which helps countries sort of in expanding their industrial industries, having it more efficient, more productive, and more in line with the latest on green technologies, including what they call the blue industry. And what I'll be talking about is how basic income can complement the technical assistance they provide to developing countries. And essentially, it's in line with what we all know, which is when you're giving individuals technical training, which they ask for, obviously it's not imposed, you're giving them technical training on engaging in more productive activities, and you're giving them some equipment to do so. If you add to this a basic income, which helps people meet their basic needs, they're only able to profit more from the technical assistance that they've been given. And so this is kind of the message that I will be sending out tomorrow, hoping to see if there is something that can be developed jointly with the UN Industrial Development Organization. So, yeah, I mean, we're all sort of working towards the same goal. Let's see where this takes us.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you. Yeah, I think let's conclude here. And I think this has been really a major milestone for BN also to make this big intervention, and then Diana also joining the UNIDO event. And I think in all the peace building and reconstruction contexts, such as Syria, Now, I think World Bank is also proposing a rebuilding fund for Syria, and also there we are trying to intervene and see if basic income can play a role in all contexts like that. Now we have come to final last 1 minute, and I'm going to, on that note, I'm going to close. And unless Guy would like to have any last word, otherwise, yes, Guy.
I would like to make one final proposal, which is that all of us individually and collectively encourage the UNDP to convene a technical workshop in Ramallah or somewhere like that in order to go through all the rationales for introducing a basic income as part of a recovery package. And that would be a really good functional initiative. I think there's an awareness and an education campaign at that level, which would be really, really useful.
That's a very good suggestion, Guy. I think from BN's side also, we will try to do that. Okay, thank you all of you for being here. And it was really, really a very important event. And we hope that the UN agencies will mainstream and take up this idea of basic income and really in application and apply it in the various contexts, particularly the post-conflict and the ongoing conflict zones. Thank you so much. With this, we conclude this event here. Thank you so much.